Thank you very much. This is going all right? It's going
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. I feel the sudden need to have patches on my elbows. A great amount of this book takes place in the First World War, and I would say maybe all of it does. Henry Bright is a sweet, kind of normal person who is from a place from West Virginia, an area that I've always really loved. And he goes to the First World War, and like I think everybody, soldier or civilian, was taken aback and thrust up against at the same time this huge incomprehensibility of war, but a war that was also so far beyond the imagination of anything that had happened before. You know, at the dawn of the century, there were horses, you know, and there was cavalry and cannons, and by the end of the First World War, there was poison gas and airplanes and machine guns that could shoot 600 bullets in a minute, and dynamite, and the flu, which wiped out millions and millions of people, more than even in the war itself. And it seemed that the war had suddenly this new ability to take out entire civilizations, and that was just something that nobody could imagine. And you know, shell shock was given a name, you know, post-traumatic stress, and it was they actually thought that the sound of the cannons, the guns that were so loud, actually rearranged the molecules in people's heads. And they would find soldiers wandering around behind the lines, completely disoriented by the sound and unable to explain how they had gotten there. And people went home and lived with the memories of this without ever even having a name or a diagnosis of any kind. I really feel that the First World War in American memory is very faint. You know, even though right now in fighting in Iraq, you know, the wars in Afghanistan, wars in Iraq, are a direct result of lines that were drawn, you know, after the First World War. And the Second World War came about because of the First. And it's just an amazing period of history that we were briefly a part of. And I started reading and began to just be transfixed by this period from 1913 to 1918, you know, this period of time. And right before we sort of thought everything was figured out, and then we realized that nothing was figured out, and then we had about 100 years where we still kept getting reminded of that. And I wanted to, so as I was writing and as I was researching the First World War, I wanted as much of the powerful experience of the things that I learned about to try and come onto the page and not get in the way of them, you know. And so as I began to read a lot of autobiographies by soldiers, a lot of them British and some American, as well as a lot of popular dime novels at the time, which were really, besides being kind of hilarious, were some of the most poorly written pieces of fiction I've ever read, but also entertaining for that. And I started to read a lot, and these sections of the war here are as much a product of a lot of those people's works as my imagination. So this is the third section here. This is Henry Bright. He's in the First World War. He has been in an attack. Most of the people that he's been with have been killed in a shelling, and it's he and Bert, who's a character, and his sergeant who has been shot, and he's going to fetch water for the sergeant. This is the first time he and the angel meet. Wait. At the sound of the voice, the world fell silent. There was no night breeze, no rifle fire. Even the large caliber guns seemed to pause from their thundering and look around themselves, as if the unexpected word had wandered in like a small child and interrupted their supper conversation. Bright stopped as well, the canteen in his hand frozen above the trough. It was impossible to tell how distant the voice was, or even if it had been speaking to him. It had seemed to come from all directions at once, a calm command, without emotion. He lifted his eyes to the farmhouse window above the trough, expecting to see a face framed in it, peering out at him. But the darkness there was just as still and solid as it had been before. Beneath his hand, the water's obsidian surface reflected the shadow of the canteen against the cold black drop of stars. I'm fetching water, he said. I have a man back there and I'm getting him some water. He took the silence that followed as incomprehension or consideration. English? He asked. American? Water? He waited for an answer, thinking of the rifle slung on his back, but there would be no time. He put his hands in the air, one still clutching the empty canteen, and then stood slowly. Water? He said again, turning to face the man who had snuck up behind him. There was nothing and no one there. He shifted to the right and left, then made a full circle in the darkness to show whoever had whispered that he was only holding a canteen in his hand. Wait. The voice commanded. A faint scent, insidious and sharp as chopped radishes, rose to his nostrils. In an instant, he had thrown the canteen on the ground and dropped his hand to grope at the belt where he kept the gas mask. It wasn't there, and he searched frantically for it before realizing he left it with his jacket back in the ditch by the stone wall. Cold panic held him for an instant, then drifted away like mist. He'd heard no shells fall nearby. It was possible he had missed the sound of the gas canister, which traveled at slower speeds than artillery and hummed lowly like old men in workshops as they flew. When a gas alarm was raised, you had 6 seconds to get your mask on, or if not, you had 2 days in which to experience annihilating agony, and then forever to either be dead or terribly wounded. Mustard gas didn't even need to be inhaled. It was heavy, gangrenous stuff that trundled close to the ground, collecting with the rainwater in greasy floating slicks at the bottoms of shell craters, potholes, and trenches. His temples were throbbing, and he realized that he had been holding his breath. He let it out slowly. Sniffed the air again. The smell of the gas was certainly there, but it was very faint. Looking down, his eyes came to rest on the trough. In the darkness, its pale gray stone shone up around the water it held like the wide mouth of some monstrous fish. Whatever mustard gas had recently drifted through the farmyard was gone now, save for the stuff that had settled in a thin layer over the surface of the water in the trough. All at once, with a kind of pent-up gaiety, the war started once more where it had left off. In the distance, explosions strobed haphazardly against whatever poor clouds had wandered into the path of the big guns. Bright stared down into the gape of the great fish's mouth until he'd finally caught his breath and his heartbeat had slowed. Then he picked up the canteen from the ground and replaced its top before stooping to collect the others. When he got back to the stone wall, Bert was asleep. Carlson was dead.